Hello, welcome to Capturing Christianity. I am Cameron Bertuzzi, and today I have invited back Jimmy Akin, who is a Catholic philosopher and apologist, and he has, if you don't know, an amazing podcast. It's called Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and I've listened to several episodes at this point. It's basically the only thing that I turn on when I open up my podcast app is Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, because of how much I love it. I mean, the way that you guys do it, where you have you and it's Dom, and it's very organized. Like you'll say, let's read this passage from something. It could be the Bible. It could be like, someone's testimonial about some particular case, some phenomena you guys are looking at, and then he'll read it. So you'll reference it, then he'll read it. So it's very organized, and it's very, very well put together, the whole thing. And so what we're doing today on today's show is we're going to look at, three different episodes, three particular episodes from your podcast. We're going to kind of review them, just get some more insight from you on these three individual episodes, and talk about some really cool stuff. So those topics are demons, aliens, and what was the last? Poltergeist. Poltergeist is probably that's the name of the episode, but what did I have it? Psychokinesis, I think, is the term that I used in the title of the video. All of those are kind of related, and I think you even say like telekinesis. It's not really, it's kind of hard to actually kind of pin down, at least it seemed to me, on that episode in particular, like what term to use, because it's so interesting. I mean, just listening to that, you interviewed this guy named John Kruth, and it was just mind-boggling, like just to hear what he had to say. And man, I can't wait to get into that. But we should probably start with the episode that we decided to start with, which is the episode. Let me actually pull it up, my notes here. It's episode 188, which is entitled "It's Always Demons." So we thought it would be helpful to start out today's show discussing the topic of demons. And I've done a lot of episodes. If you've watched Capturing Christianity before, I've done episodes where I've interviewed exorcists. I've interviewed psychiatrists who have interviewed and investigated these things on their own and even been part of exorcisms. The Catholic Church, one of the things that they do is they take claims of demon possession very, very seriously. So any good exorcist is going to do their due diligence to rule out any kind of like mental illness. And so they call on experts in mental health, like psychiatrists and psychologists, to come in and try to investigate these. I mean, you could say, if they are demon possessed, these victims. In some cases, they invite them in, and they don't even want them to leave, and so it's difficult to call them a victim in that case. But nevertheless, they come in and they investigate. And so, but what we wanted to discuss today with respect to demons is when you're discussing something like extraterrestrial intelligence or any kind of phenomena that's kind of like strange or weird or something that's just different than what we're accustomed to, it can be, I think for Christians, we see it all the time, is, people attribute this stuff to demons. And so we wanted to discuss at the very outset of the show, like, what are some of the reasons not to do that? Okay. Because it can actually be, there are some very practical reasons not to just jump to the conclusion that it's demons in all of these cases. There's a reason that the Catholic Church has this rigorous criteria that they have to go through in order to, because what can happen is if you're, it's basically like a sort of medical diagnosis, at least in the case of an exorcism, is that if you get the wrong diagnosis, then you can really severely hurt this person. So if you, wrongly interpret the phenomena that you're seeing, like someone is being more angry than normal, or they might start having some other symptoms, and you're like, well, I can't really explain that naturally, so I'm just going to infer demons. And then what can happen is, if you do that too quickly, if it is a mental health issue, and I'm kind of like speaking for you at this point because I've already listened to your episode, but if you do that, then it can lead to some pretty disastrous consequences. So it's really important that we don't just, and I think also this is tied in with just a healthy dose of critical thinking, skepticism. As Christians, we don't just need to be super credulous about everything. That's not like what it means to be a Christian or anything like that. You don't have to shut off your brain when you're a Christian. We want to think critically about everything, or at least as much as we can. So, well, let me, at this point, Jimmy, let me go ahead and pass it over to you. And maybe let's start actually doing this. So just give us a taste of what Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World is all about. I've got it linked in the description of the video if you guys want to go check it out and see all the episodes. You have like, what, 300 episodes at this point? You're coming up on 300.
Coming up on 300, yes. We have our 5th anniversary of the podcast coming up this August, and I have a special show prepared for that. Basically, what we do on Mysterious World is every Friday we have a new episode, and we typically are looking at a new mystery. Sometimes we have 2-parters, and a mystery will span 2 weeks because there's just so much to say about it. But we look at a mystery, and it can be any kind of mystery. We cover true crime a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. The reason it's not more is because I discovered after starting the podcast, we try to make it a family-friendly show, and there are lots of kids listening. And parents have actually encouraged their kids to listen because we look at these mysteries from the twin perspectives of faith and reason, and it shows how to integrate faith and reason and how Christianity can handle mysterious topics and integrate them in a Christian worldview. And so a lot of parents want their kids to listen to the show because it teaches critical thinking, and it also teaches how to integrate mysterious subjects with your faith. And so because of that, I always warn parents if we're going to have an episode that this is a true crime episode, so it may not be suitable for younger children. But we do some true crime. We also do historical mysteries. Things that happened in the past that we're not 100% sure about often exactly what happened, and we try to solve these mysteries to the extent possible. We also look at paranormal mysteries like ghosts and poltergeists, psychic functioning. We look at, in fact, I've interviewed several of the government's former Defense Department psychic spies who were part of a program between the 70s and the 90s called Stargate that they were using during the Cold War to psychically spy, for example, on the Russians. And I've interviewed several of those people. We also look at religious mysteries. Like what's the Antichrist? What is the significance of the number 666? We look at UFOs. We look at cryptids or hidden animals like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. And I mix it up. We look at something different every week, and I rotate the topics consciously. So there's always something new, for everybody, no matter what their taste is. Like I said, we actually, unlike some shows, and I don't know many other shows, certainly not from the Christian perspective, that actually try to solve the mysteries. A lot of shows that are mystery oriented,
they just promote the mystery.
Yeah, it's like, just imagine, and what if this were true? And they try to inspire wonder, and that's fine. I appreciate wonder, but I also appreciate, let's solve this thing. Yeah. And so we have a segment called the Reason Perspective, where we say, what could we learn about this mystery just from the reason perspective? And then we also have another segment called the faith perspective, where we say, okay, what would the Christian faith have to say about this? And so we try to consciously integrate a thoughtful, rational Christian perspective on the different mysteries we cover. And that includes episode 188, It's Always Demons. That's actually an in-joke on the show. Early on in the show, in talking about various mysterious phenomena, we developed a couple of tongue-in-cheek sayings. It's always aliens, and it's always demons, because those are the two hypotheses people always want to go for. Could this have been aliens, and could this have been demons? And in fact, coming up soon, I'm going to do a could it be alien demons? But one of the sort of foundational episodes that I did was on It's Always Demons, because a lot of people, especially a lot of Christians, leap to that hypothesis without adequate evidence for it. And that's bad for a number of reasons. One reason is it gives the devil too much credit. Christian theology has historically recognized 3 sources of temptation: the world, the flesh, and the devil. The world is the bad example that other people set for us. And so we see other people doing bad stuff that can tempt us to do bad stuff too. We think it's okay to do that stuff. The flesh is our own disordered desires that we're born with as a result of original sin, and our disordered desires also can tempt us into sinning. And then the devil can tempt us. But the devil's just one of those three sources. And so if you say it's always demons, the devil is after me or something, you're going to scare yourself, and you're frankly giving him too much credit. He's just one of the three sources of temptation. To illustrate,
if you if you don't mind me jumping in just quickly. So as I was thinking about that, I mean, of the exorcists that I've interviewed, I think it was Vincent Lampert who said it's talking with, or sort of in conjunction with the point that you're kind of giving the devil too much credit, is that there he gets now that he's a little bit more well known, like he's done some interviews on YouTube and everything, and even with some news agencies and whatnot. So people reach out to him routinely saying, I think I'm possessed. I need help. Help me get rid of this thing. And he says that of the people that reach out to him, only 1 in 5,000 would he, after investigating and having them go through a sort of psychological analysis and everything, then will he conclude that they're possessed or a victim of oppression or something like that. And so it's a very small number, actually, that are, when you actually look at the real numbers, at least according to the people that are working in the field, like these actual exorcists, who have this very rigorous standard that they go through in order to determine that someone has some sort of possession or anything like that. So I think that's important as well, is that just in terms of the number of people that experience this, from the experts at least, it seems like this is a very rare thing that occurs.
Yes.
And so it is going to have at least some impact, or it should have some impact on how quickly we're going to, as you say, jump to that conclusion that in this case, some other person, this is a real possessed case. Now, I mean, on the flip side, when you hear the testimony from an exorcist who's saying, that's true, but then there are these cases that I've, where they are demon possessed. And as Christians, I think most Christians, the vast majority of Christians, would accept the existence of demons and the like. And so it's not that we're trying to say that you should never conclude that some demon is involved or anything like that, but just be more careful than I think that we see when people are investigating this sort of like mysterious phenomena.
Yeah, it is. Now, there are lower levels of demonic activity that are more common, just little temptations that people have. And there's really no way to distinguish, did that come from the world, the flesh, or the devil? It's not really worth worrying about that. The thing to do when you have temptation is ignore it. But the overt cases where it's really clear that a demon is manifesting, those are rare. And I've talked to other people working with, exorcists who have said the same thing, that in a city with a population, or an area with a population of 2 million, you may have 2 people who are having overt demonic manifestations. So the full-blown overt ones are real, and they do need to be taken seriously when they occur, but they're not as common as people often suspect. And to illustrate the dangers of leaping to the demon hypothesis, I begin episode 188 with 2 things. By the way, if people want to, Cameron has a link in the description to the episode. You can also get it by going to mysterious.fm/188. But I begin with 2 illustrations of the problem of leaping to the demon hypothesis. The first is a clip from Saturday Night Live. You may remember a few years ago, Dana Carvey was a regular on the show, and he played a character named Enid Strict, also better known as the church lady. And one of the church lady's catchphrases was, could it be Satan? And she would use that constantly. Every phenomenon or anything she disapproved of, she would attribute to Satan. And it was funny because it was ridiculous. Not every phenomenon in the world is directly attributable to Satan, but anything she mildly disapproved of, could it be Satan? And people laughed at that because it was so ridiculous. And that's how Christians look when they attribute phenomena to demons without good evidence that it's demons. They look ridiculous. And I wanted to let people, see that and experience that. The other thing I did to begin the episode as a lesson in why we need to be really careful here is I recounted some actual home exorcism cases that I found most of them were within the previous 2 years. And I found them just by going on Google News and typing in exorcism and death. And I listed like 8 exorcism cases. Most of them were just diagnosed by people at home. Most of them involved the people's children who were acting up in various ways. The parents concluded their children were demon possessed, and they did an at-home exorcism that ended up killing the child. So, for example, one father in New Mexico, in one of these cases, he had a 2-year-old. The 2-year-old was throwing temper tantrums like 2-year-olds do. And he became convinced his 2-year-old was possessed by a demon. So he held him under a hot water faucet in order to drive out the demon with the hot water. And the boy ended up scalded and drowned. And this is not a unique case. There are lots of these. I recounted 8 of them in brief form. I didn't go through them all in detail, but I recounted 8 different stories like this where people did an exorcism and somebody died as a result. Right. Because they leapt to the demon hypothesis and didn't bring in experts to really seriously look at if it was a demon or not, and who would be trained in how to deal with it if it was a demon.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just thinking about the details of that case. Was it a 2-year-old or a 6-year-old? I think I remember you saying that it was a 6-year-old on the podcast, but I could just be mistaken.
It's been a while since I did that episode, so my memory is fuzzy. It was a small child, though.
Yeah, very, very young child. And the reason why I was even thinking about the age is because I've got a 5-year-old son myself who's about to turn 6, so it kind of like made that point hit home for me. So I mean, one question I've got on, I'm trying to think of a way to put this that's not too technical. So in philosophy, there's like practical considerations. There's a question in philosophy whether or not a practical consideration should make you require more evidence for something. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of philosophers actually think that that's not the case, that just because you've got some nasty consequence that might follow from holding a belief, that doesn't actually make it the case that you've got to have more evidence for something. And so I wanted to kind of get your idea or your thoughts on that type of that reasoning, whether or not you think that practical concerns can actually raise the bar. You need to raise the bar in that case, or would you say that? So to me, I mean, because we've already given like an actual non-practical reason for not jumping to that conclusion, which is the fact that of the people that do reach out to exorcists and that go through this process and get checked out and everything, only a very small number of them are actually demon possessed. And so that's a reason alone, like even apart from this other consideration that we were just discussing with the fact that like people who do this too quickly, it can lead to real harm and in some cases death. And so, but that was one of the questions that I had. It's maybe a little bit esoteric and people may not be interested in it, but I was just curious your thoughts on it.
Let me address that. So I assume what you're referring to is like Alvin Plantinga's Reformed epistemology and so forth. Or no, okay. Why don't you say it to me in technical language, and that may help.
Okay, so the term is pragmatic encroachment. And it's whether or not a practical or pragmatic reason can impact the epistemic situation that one finds themselves in. So if there's some great practical benefit that might incur from believing something or not believing something, then that can actually, pragmatic encroachment says that the pragmatic can actually encroach on the epistemic.
Yeah. And I would agree with that. Because, and it seems to me that that's just common sense. I mean, suppose that I have money on the line in some case. If I, let's say I'm buying a house, and the house costs $1. Well, okay, the $1 doesn't. I have several dollars, so a house that costs me $1 is not something that if I invest $1 in this house and it turns out to be lousy, it's easy for me to get a different house. All I spent was $1. So I don't have a high duty to investigate, is this house really going to be worth it to me? But if I'm looking at another house and this other house costs $1 million, well, I don't have several $1,000,000. And so if something's going to cost me $1 million, assuming I can, get a loan for that or whatever, I really need to check that house out and find out, is it really going to do what I need? Is it a good house? Is it leaky? Is it drafty? Are there problems with it? I really need to, just as a matter of practical reason, investigate this house to find out if it's worth $1 million. Whereas I don't really need to investigate a house to find out if it's worth $1. So, just practical reason tells me the greater the stakes, the greater I need to investigate if I can. Now, there are situations in life where we have big stakes and no way to get the data we would like. And in those cases, you have to roll the dice. You have to hope the hard 6 comes up. That's 3 and 3, by the way. So there are situations where we're forced to make difficult choices without the evidence we want. But if we have evidence available to us, the higher the practical stakes are, the more we need to invest the time and energy looking at that evidence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to kind of highlight the fact that this is, in philosophy is an area that I'm really interested in. That's the area that I'm most familiar with, is philosophy, religion, and epistemology and stuff. And so I actually did kind of want to talk about this a little bit. Like, why am I even talking about this on Capturing Christianity, these different subjects like demons and aliens and all these things? So I've noticed, as I was like, there was something that came up the other day on, because I browse Reddit every now and then, and there's a UFO Reddit and everything, and I never really took it seriously. And then one day I saw this claim about David Grush, and I was like, well, that's interesting. This guy's like a whistleblower, and he seemed to be like respectable and stuff. And so, like, what does he have to say? And then I watched this interview, and I'm like, this is pretty crazy. And then I started to think, well, there's actually a lot of overlap between apologetics and the questions of ETIs and even demons. If demons exist, that seems to be some pretty good evidence against atheism, in my opinion. Yeah. And so atheists have to find some other natural explanation as to why these people are behaving in the ways that they are. One of the ways that exorcists will infer that a demon is present is if the person suddenly starts speaking some ancient language that they've never learned, or that they have this sort of hidden knowledge where they know something going on remotely that they couldn't otherwise possibly know what's going on. There's all sorts of things that they use in order to infer that some demon is operating. But atheists, what they'll have to do is find some natural explanation to account for that. But it's actually pretty difficult in a lot of these cases. Like, how do you account for someone suddenly speaking some ancient language in an ancient dialect that's never been spoken or hasn't been spoken in several hundred years? An atheist would have to take that and be like, I think the best they might be able to do is that, like, well, they learned it some other way and they just didn't tell anyone or something like that. And so that's, go ahead.
Yeah. So you mentioned several of the criteria that are used for diagnosing demons. One of them is knowledge of a language the person doesn't naturally have knowledge of. Another is other knowledge the person doesn't have knowledge of, like knowledge of distant things or future things. Another is physical feats the person should not be capable of, like levitation or crawling up a wall or physical strength. Physical strength. And then the kind of the final one is in the classical enumeration is aversion to the holy. So if the person can't bear to look at a picture of Jesus or Mary, or can't hold a Bible, or can't hold a crucifix, that's kind of the clincher. And then really we should also enumerate manifestation of an alternative personality in the case of possession. Now, that wouldn't be the case for obsession, where a demon is messing with somebody, but they're not seizing control of them. But if they're actually possessed, then they manifest an alternate personality that displays these characteristics. On that last point
that you made of the sort of last pointer that we're dealing with, a demon, aversion to the holy. When I interviewed Father Carlos Martins one of the stories that he told, if I am recalling that correctly, you can just go watch that episode if you're interested. It's just with Father Carlos Martins on Capturing Christianity. He was saying that he was interviewing this guy in his office. I think it was a male, and he had some holy water on his hand, and he went behind him to where he couldn't see him, and then he flicked a drop on like the back of his jacket, and then the guy like suddenly sprang up out of his chair and like started making some sort of noise or whatever. And so but there was no way that he would have felt just a single flick of water like dripping on the back of a jacket. And so that's the type of thing that we're looking at here. That's one of the tests that they'll do when they're trying to discern, apart from going through all the sort of rigorous mental health checks and all that they do.
Yeah, they'll also do things like putting holy water or blessed oil on an object and then letting the person touch the object, or they'll just bless an object and not outside of the person's knowledge, and give them the object that the person doesn't know has been blessed and see if they have a negative reaction. And to my mind, it's that's the strong, that and the alternative personality are the strongest indicators of demonic possession, because the others can be explained in other ways. Samson, and including by gifts of God, Samson was preternaturally strong. So preternatural strength is not an automatic indication of demonic possession. Samson was not demonically possessed. Speaking another language is a gift of the Holy Ghost. That's speaking in tongues. And so the Holy Ghost can inspire Christians to speak in languages they don't naturally know. And that's not demons, that's the Holy Spirit. Hidden knowledge. Guess what prophets get all the time? So if someone has the gift of prophecy, they're going to have hidden knowledge. That's what prophets get, either knowledge about distant things or future things or what's going to happen if you do this. Prophets are all about hidden knowledge. So those three, other languages, hidden knowledge, and preternatural strength or similar things like that, are not clear-cut indicators of demonic activity. They could be God acting in a situation. Also, they could be human. One of the things in the Catholic tradition is and this is true in other Christian traditions as well to some extent, but I can speak from the Catholic position because I've researched this aspect of it rather closely. You have doctors of the church. Now, a doctor of the church is one of the greatest theologians of all time. And so far, there are 30-something doctors of the church. Among them are St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas. Both St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas believed in what today would be called psychic powers. Now, they didn't have that word because the term psychic was invented, in its modern sense, was invented in the 19th century, and they lived before that. But they both believed in psychic functioning. Both Augustine and Aquinas believed in what we would call precognition. They believed this was a natural ability that works some of the time, not all the time, but some of the time, that God had built into human nature. So that's why it's a natural ability. It's not being caused by spirits. It's being caused in the person himself by his own nature. St. Thomas Aquinas referred to it as natural prophecy, to distinguish it from the supernatural prophecy that God gives. And so you have this tradition in Catholic Christianity of being open to psychic functioning, whether it's precognition or clairvoyance or psychokinesis or whatever it may be. The Catholic Church is open. Now, it doesn't teach this, but it's open to the idea that God built into human nature certain weak natural abilities that today would be classified as psychic. And whether they exist or not is a matter for science to determine. That's what parapsychology tries to do. But because the Catholic tradition is open to psychic functioning, you read various exorcists and they will acknowledge this. For example, there was a very famous exorcist in Rome who was a friend of John Paul II named Corrado Balducci, and he wrote a whole book about, the devil and possession and so forth. I've read it. And he talks about how in some cases, people are just using telepathy and they get hidden knowledge by that, or they're using precognition and they get hidden knowledge by that. So you can't automatically look at foreign language or hidden knowledge or preternatural strength as conclusive proof of a demon. It could be mental illness. It could be some other natural cause. It could be God causing these, or it could be natural human abilities that as yet are poorly understood. What is the real clincher that it's a demon is the alternative personality and provided there's an absence of mental illness, so that it's not dissociative identity disorder, and especially aversion to the holy, especially when the person has hidden knowledge of the holy. So like if you bless an object, the person doesn't know it's blessed, but you give it to them and they have a horrible reaction. Okay, the demon knew it was blessed, even though the demon's victim did not. And that's strong evidence you got a demon.
Well, why don't we at this point kind of switch gears and talk about some of these other episodes that we plan to discuss today. So we've got 2 more episodes we'd like to touch on, and again, kind of the point of this show. And Jimmy didn't ask me to do this. I just wanted to help others know about the existence of this amazing podcast that I found, hosted by Jimmy Akin, that I did not even know existed until a couple weeks ago. So I can't believe it's taken so long for me to get my eyes on this, or at least my ears on this. But one other nice thing I wanted to say about the podcast before I move on. Again, Jimmy did not pay me to talk about this or say nice things about him. But one of the things that really strikes me as I listen to your podcast is the amount of work that goes in to each episode. It's pretty impressive. I mean, the fact that you're able to do one a week is actually, in addition to everything else that you do for a living, is pretty incredible. You have a lot of information that you provide. You provide quotes from people. You provide all sorts of details about the accounts, and then you provide an analysis at the end. But I'm really impressed. I think you guys do a really, really good job over there. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Unfortunately, I don't have a family really, so I have to keep myself busy nights and weekends. And one of the ways I do that, I'm a quick writer and I write very fast. And so I'm able to bang out, like a 30-page script every week. But it helps keep me mentally stimulated doing the research and the writing for the show. And I enjoy doing it as much as I hope people enjoyed listening to it.
Awesome. Okay, so let's now turn to, in the title of the video today, I think I've got this is genuinely unexplained. And so we haven't gotten to that yet. We're about to. So we've got 2 different cases we're going to look to that I believe Jimmy would say this is genuinely unexplained phenomena. What do we do with this? It's really hard to know. So the first case is actually going to involve what might be extraterrestrials. And this happened, remind me of the years, with
1964.
1964. Episode 231, Lonnie Zamora. He was an officer. Is that correct? Yes. Yeah, he was an officer in Socorro, New Mexico. So why don't you go ahead and set us up on this one and explain kind of the basic details.
Okay, so it's 1964. We're in the state of New Mexico at a place called Socorro, and Lonnie Zamora is a local police officer. And he's driving down the road. He sees a black car that he believes is driven by a 17-year-old young man that he knows, and it's speeding. So he thinks he's got a 17-year-old kid driving recklessly. He takes chase. He starts following the kid, and then he hears an enormous roaring sound. And he remembers there is a dynamite shack nearby. And he's afraid the dynamite shack, the reason for the roaring is the dynamite shack may have blown up. He also looks and he sees a tower of flame. And so he thinks the dynamite shack may have blown up. And so he starts heading towards the dynamite shack in case anybody is injured and, needs emergency care and, get taken to the hospital and things like that. However, when he gets to where the dynamite shack is located, he's got to drive up on this embankment. And he looks down over the embankment and he sees what initially strikes him as an upside down car. And he thinks that it's an upside down white car that some people have flipped over. and again, due to presumably reckless driving or something. And he sees a couple of people, smallish people, wearing white coveralls outside the vehicle. As he gets a closer look at the vehicle, though, he notices it's not really a car. It's more oval than that. It's a white, silvery metallic oval. It's got an insignia on it, which looks kind of like a red arrow pointing upwards with an upside down letter U over it. It's got this strange insignia on it, and it's got flame coming out from underneath it, and it's got landing struts underneath it.
One of the things that sort of struck me in the episode that you guys were, when you were discussing the details, is that there was like some flames coming out, and the flames were narrower at the top.
Yes,
which I thought was interesting. I mean, I don't know much about flame production, but that sounds abnormal.
If they're narrower at the top, that to my mind would seem consistent with, because normally in a rocket motor you have a nozzle that expels the flame, and then because the flame is not coherent, it spreads out as the rocket is being propelled upward or forward. But anyway, he sees this landing gear and this flame underneath it, and then the flame builds up. He hears some thumping, like a hatch being shut, and then he doesn't see the human-like figures anymore. So he hears what sounds like a hatch shut. Maybe they went back inside this thing. And then the flame intensifies. It starts lifting off from the ground, and it starts making this enormous roaring sound again. And he's afraid it's going to blow up. It sounds like it's just so loud. He's afraid it's going to blow up. So he starts running back towards his police vehicle. He actually bumps his leg on the fender. He's so anxious to get away from it. It rises up past the embankment, and then then the flame disappears. After it's risen, the flame stops, and then it shoots off very rapidly over the mountains and is lost to sight. And so that was his basic experience with it. But after his experience, immediately after, he went down to where he had seen it on the ground. And there are impressions on the ground from the landing gear. And from the flame, the vegetation has caught fire and is still smoking. And he called for backup. He was in radio communication with the local police station. They sent other officers. They saw the same things. They took pictures of it within like half an hour of the encounter. They had photographs of the impressions on the ground and the smoking vegetation. So there's
physical evidence.
Right. That kicks it. That would qualify this as a close encounter of the second kind, which is where a UFO has a physical effect on its environment. And the fact he saw apparent occupants would make it a close encounter of the third kind on J. Allen Hynek's scale. So Hynek himself, he was a head of the astronomy department at Northwestern, and he also was the civilian advisor for the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which went on until 1969. So he actually came out and investigated this case. He looked at Officer Zamora. He interviewed other witnesses. He checked, and other people from Blue Book also checked with, like, could this have been some kind of military test? And basically, they didn't find a good explanation for this. They considered a bunch of possibilities. Could this have been a hoax? Could it have been misidentification of something else? Could it have been a secret science or engineering project that the government or military was doing? They looked at all that, and we can go through some of those possibilities if you'd like, but Hynek basically concluded, we don't know what happened in this case. Hynek said this guy's honest, and we've got these photos that other people took of the effects of this things. Other people also besides Zamora saw it in the area and heard it. So this was not just a one-person thing. And so it looks like a real event that really happened. It wasn't simply he misidentified the planet Venus. The planet Venus doesn't do these things. And they checked with the local military bases, and they checked with NASA, because this was, the space program times in the 60s. They were making probes to go to the moon and stuff. They checked on those. It wasn't any of those. And so by process of elimination, Hynek and Project Blue Book, even though they were very reluctant to classify cases as unexplained, they said, we checked out all the possibilities and we can't explain this. This one's genuinely unexplained.
And Lonnie himself, if I recall from the episode, he didn't even believe like in ETIs or anything like that. And so he wasn't trying to conclude that.
Yeah. He also got sick of talking about this. And he, in later years, reportedly got so sick of people asking him about this that he basically clammed up, and he'd invite you over to the barbecues he had at his house, provided you didn't talk about this, because he was just sick of it.
Which kind of does rule out the hoax option. Maybe, I mean, it could be some sort of hoax with like other people involved that weren't him, obviously. Right. But that is one of the options that they went through, right? They tried to go through the hoax. Yeah, wasn't there like a high school involved that claimed that they did it or something like that?
There were accusations that he had a hoax played on him by students from New Mexico Tech. And the problem is this was just speculation. There is no one ever admitted to this. And then there are further problems. Like if it was students at New Mexico Tech who were playing a hoax on this police officer they didn't like, why didn't they ever announce the hoax? I mean, that's what you do. If you don't like somebody, you want to make them look like a fool. You put them in a situation where they appear foolish, and then you say, ha ha, what a fool you are. That was all a hoax. And nobody ever came forward and said, ha ha, what an idiot Officer Zamora is. He fell for our hoax. Nobody ever did that. So this is just speculation. Also, how would they do it? You know, how would they get this? Zamora saw the two humanoid or human figures down by this thing, and they weren't there after it lifted off. So obviously they got inside it. Yeah. How did they make this craft rise with this flame if it's a big heavy metal thing? I mean, where you can't just go down
and then it takes off without
Home Depot and get a rocket motor to lift off with, and then they need some other way to zoom off over the mountains quickly without a rocket motor. So it seems unexplainable how they would actually execute a hoax like this. There have been proposals like maybe they had a balloon and the balloon was tied to a vehicle, but then this is in the New Mexico desert. If you got a balloon tied to a vehicle and the vehicle is racing off, it's going to kick up dust. You're going to see the dust trail on the ground from the thing. So, and a balloon like this, probably if it's being drugged by just an ordinary vehicle, is it really going to hold two people? And it looks like this craft is made out of metal, so if it's capable of holding people and there's no basket under it. So it's a hard case to explain.
So as I was listening to the episode, I was thinking like, what could explain this? And I think I've got a possible explanation that I don't think you've considered yet.
Oh, I'd love to hear.
So, yeah, demons.
Okay, let's go back to first principles. What evidence do we have of demons being involved? Is anybody displaying occult knowledge, hidden knowledge in this case? No. Is anyone speaking a foreign language that they don't naturally know? No. Is anyone doing anything preternaturally strong? No. So none of our inconclusive tests seem to apply here. Okay, how about our more conclusive ones? Is anyone displaying an alternative personality in the absence of mental illness? No. And does anyone here have a strong, unexplainable aversion to the holy? No. So we don't have good evidence of demons being involved in this case. You can conjecture anything you want as a demon. I mean, even angels can pass as human. We have accounts in the Bible of angels passing as human. So any person you meet on the street could be an angel or they could be a demon, but you're going to be paranoid if you assume they are. You need evidence before I say, Cameron Bertuzzi, you're really a demon. It's just appearing to be human. I need evidence to make that accusation. I ain't got it, so I assume you're a human. And in this case, even though we have a mysterious thing, we don't have specific evidence of demons being involved.
Right. I mean, what would the hypothesis? The hypothesis would have to be something like these were two demons in some kind of physical form. They had some kind of craft that they had. Where did that come from? Did demons just have like spacecraft now that can fly and zoom and everything, and you can physically see it, and it's going to leave physical impressions and marks and everything? It just seems, I mean, it just doesn't seem like a good explanation to jump to. There's other possible explanations that could explain it. And again, in this case, we're saying it's sort of unexplained. There are maybe some sort of ETI explanation that you could appeal to. But apart from that, what is going to explain it? It's probably not demons.
Yeah. So apropos of that now, various medieval theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas, in order to explain how demons could assume physical form, they're created intellects, so they're not natively physical like we are. But they can assume temporary physical forms, as can angels. And the medievals, they're working with an Aristotelian physics that has, the classical four elements: air, earth, fire, and water, and sometimes ether. And so they would say, well, maybe what demons are doing or angels are doing when they take physical form is they're condensing the air. So you've got this free-floating matter in the air, and they're condensing it to make a physical form that they use temporarily. And so they referred to these bodies as aerial bodies because they were thought to be made out of air. And if an angel or a demon is doing this, then it's mind over matter. The angel is using its created intellect, its mind, to influence matter, whether it's air or something else. So the name in modern parapsychology for that ability is psychokinesis. In pop culture, you will hear the name telekinesis, which is a bit of an older name. It's actually not really used in parapsychology these days because telekinesis, tele means distant, kinesis means motion, and a lot of telekinesis is not actually distant. But what it is if it exists, it's mentally caused. And the Greek word for mind or soul is psyche. And so
looks like we got Jimmy. He's paused here. We'll see if he comes back. I did have some more questions that I wanted to ask him about some of the recent stuff. He was on, if you didn't know this, okay, he's gone. We'll see if we can get him back here. He'll probably call back in just a second. So, yeah, here he is. All right, there we go. You're back.
There we go. I'm back. So I was just saying that the term telekinesis isn't really used in parapsychology these days because tele means distant. And so telekinesis would be distant motion. But a lot of mind over matter is not distant. But it is, if it exists, it's caused by the mind, one of the Greek words for which is psyche. And so it becomes psychokinesis, mind-caused motion. And so angels and demons have psychokinetic abilities, and they can manipulate matter. They can manipulate matter in such a way as to generate temporary forms for themselves. And if they can do that, they could presumably manipulate matter in such a way to make a spaceship. So could God. So even though, to quote James T. Kirk, what does God need with a spaceship? He could make one himself if he wanted, if he chose to. And so could an angel or a demon. But the question is, why? We don't have any evidence that these folks were demons, and making spaceships is not consistent with what we see demons doing in the Bible or in Christian history. I mean, they're not saying, hey, let's all go worship Baal or by the way, worship me. They're not possessing anybody. And so this isn't consistent with the known behavior of demons. They would have to be doing something new and different than what they've historically done. And and that means we don't have good evidence for this. This isn't a known demon behavior.
I'd like to, at this point, let me see if I can get my screen to show up. So there's been a couple comments along the same lines. Let me go ahead and pull this down here so it looks okay on the screen. So someone says, Word says, this such silliness undermines our credibility when presenting the gospel. Aliens are not real. I'd like to discuss this. And then there was another comment that was made by Christopher Hatch. Cam, why are you bringing on these cranks? It discredits your channel and our faith, young man. So I'd like to address these comments a little bit. So
sure.
I earlier I said the reason why I even have an interest in this topic at all is because some of the recent claims that were made by this whistleblower, David Grush. We've done an episode on that just a week ago at this point. Highly recommend checking out that video. And there's actually been some more developments on that story that have come out, even as soon as recently as I think yesterday or even on Tuesday, I think, Marco Rubio came forward and said that there's other whistleblowers that are part of this. And so this is going to be a big developing story that's going to develop over the next couple months. And it's going to be very, very interesting. There's some really credible reports that are coming out about UAPs, ETIs, all, like really, really interesting stuff. So that got me thinking, well, how does Christianity, how can we integrate this topic? How can we really think about, like, if ETIs do exist, if there is some sort of extraterrestrial intelligence, how does that work with the Christian story? How should Christians respond to this? And then there's further questions about, like, well, how likely, if we're thinking about apologetics, because I think about apologetics pretty much on a daily basis. And when I was interviewing exorcists and everything, I was thinking, like, could this actually be evidence for the truth of Christianity? I think it is. I think it can be, if we find a good case of good in the sense of, like, evidential, right? Not in the sense of, like, it's good that someone is possessed, but if we find someone, if we find good evidence for the truth of some sort of exorcism or demonic possession, like, doesn't that provide evidence for Christianity? It's got to. And so there's other further questions related to ETIs about how likely is it that life exists at all in this universe, given atheism. And that, I mean, to me, that probability is extremely low. It's extremely low that life would exist anywhere in the universe if atheism were true. But then if ETIs exist, it's not just that we have human life or animal life, or it's supposed that evolution is true, everything sort of, or common descent is true, everything goes back to this one organism that everything sort of sprung from. But the question is still, like, how did that life begin? So how likely is that? So not only do we have life on this planet, if we have life on other planets, or maybe even like these interdimensional beings that exist in other parts of the multiverse or other dimensions or whatever, like, where did they come from? How likely is it that they would arise given atheism? So some people, I mean, Tyler McNabb on the previous show even argued that the ETIs are evidence for theism. So there's all sorts of interesting overlaps here that can actually, all of this stuff, nobody else is in the apologetics world is really talking about this, because I don't think they've seen necessarily the connections between apologetics and these topics. But so what we're doing is we're just exploring them and seeing what we can do with them. There's even another philosopher that I've had on. His name is Dr. Shandon Guthrie. And what he wants to do, kind of similar to what's gone on in philosophy of religion. So in philosophy of religion, you have these papers that are published and all of these different really interesting arguments for and against the existence of God. But you've got all of these very highly developed, sophisticated arguments from contingency, the Kalam cosmological argument, fine-tuning arguments from moral knowledge, all sorts of different arguments for the existence of God developed at a very high academic degree. But when it comes to these other topics, and maybe it's because they're taboo, people don't want to talk about them, like aliens or demons or whatever, like, there's not as much academic interest in these subjects. So what Dr. Guthrie wants to do is apply the same sorts of standards that are used in philosophy of religion and apply that to other subjects like demons and angels. Or I don't think that he talks about this, but with respect to ETIs and extraterrestrial intelligence. So I think hopefully we can get people interested in this to really think hard and clearly and critically about, because I don't think it's helpful to just ignore. I mean, this is one of if this is true, this has got to be like one of the biggest stories that's like the history of mankind, that extraterrestrial intelligence exists. It's got to be one. I mean, even if we could confirm that demons exist, that's got to be huge. So anyways, those are some of the reasons why I'm covering this on this channel. I think that there's a whole lot of overlap, untapped potential in this area for apologetics. And I'm hopefully going to encourage other people to start talking about these subjects and start to really think, like, if this is true, what impact does that have on my worldview? Anyways, yeah, go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah. Well, in fact, strictly speaking, angels and demons both would be ETIs. They're not native to Earth, so they're extraterrestrial, and they're intelligences, so they're ETIs.
Hmm.
Also, they're not from our physical dimension, so they are some kind of interdimensional creature. They happen to be purely intellectual ETs rather than physical ETs like we are. But I would be careful about saying, uh, you know,
This discredits the gospel.
well, especially that, because actually, it,
It
actually a
bolsters
lot of
it.
it bolsters it, because they would be other children of God, if they exist. And I don't have proof that they exist. I don't claim that, but I don't dismiss it either. I don't look down on possibilities. I want to give every possibility a fair shake and see what it has to say for itself. But it's certainly not going to discredit the gospel in the eyes of atheists for a Christian to talk about aliens, because belief in aliens is more common in secular society than it is in a lot of
Mhm.
Christian society. So actually, it's not going to discredit the gospel. It's going to show non-Christians that Christians are capable of taking this seriously and wrestling with the issue in a fair way, rather than just automatically going, "Oh, aliens can't exist." How do you know that? Is it your theological beliefs telling you that?
Mhm.
Um,
Exactly.
because how are you proving this negative?
All right, let's move on at this point to discussing the
Oh,
last episode I wanted to
as
get to. Go
as
ahead.
as to why you have cranks on like me, I'll have to let you answer that.
Oh yeah, everyone knows that Jimmy's just a crank. He has no idea what he's talking about. I mean, Jimmy, like if you watch anything from Jimmy, I even had a comment I think on the as we were preparing to air this video. So
Mhm.
sometimes I'll put this link available like a couple days before we go live, so people can start to get excited about the upcoming show and everything. And I think one of the people in the live chat before we went live was saying, "Oh, this guy again, he's critical of everything." And so we have we have that opinion of people who actually engage with what you're having to say, and then you have people
Mhm.
on the other side calling you a crank, supposedly maybe because they think that you're just credulous about all this stuff. But the reason why I have Jimmy on is because he researches and he's a very, very critical thinker. I mean,
I try
why
to
yeah.
Yeah, I try to apply. By some definitions, you could call me a skeptic, meaning a person who doesn't just accept a claim.
Mhm.
But that term also tends to mean disbeliever, and that's not what I am. I try to be an open-minded critical thinker.
Mhm.
So I try to consider every possibility. I look at the arguments for it, even if it's a widely rejected hypothesis. On Mysterious World, I did an episode on the flat Earth theory, and I tried to be and I'm not a flat Earth supporter. I think the evidence strongly supports a globe Earth theory, but I wanted to be as fair as possible and use actual flat Earth arguments and evaluate them. And I wanted to be as fair as possible to the people. When we did that, I told Domenico Bettinelli, my co-host, in doing this episode, we are not going to use the term flat earther, because that's a pejorative. If you call someone a flat earther,
Yeah.
it's an insult. So in this episode, we're going to talk about flat earth supporters and globe earth supporters, to put them on an even footing and be fair to them, including with the language we're using. So I try to be fair and open-minded, but also use critical thinking for all positions.
So let's at this point let's turn to the last episode that we wanted to cover in today's show, which was something. I mean, I think it was John. Oh, we lost Jimmy again. We'll get him back, I'm sure, in just a second. There he is.
There we go.
All right. There you go. You're back. So, John Kruth. Okay, so he in the episode he was saying that he'd never had an interest in psychokinesis or anything like this prior to doing this investigation. I mean, he just seemed like such a credible witness to me. I never
Mhm.
doubted 1 second while I was
Mhm.
listening to this interview what he was saying, because he sounded like he was really trying to do his best not to jump to any conclusion. He was like wanting to test out the claims that were being made here, and then stuff that he saw was just like so puzzling. Okay, I don't know what to do with this stuff. So let's talk about this one. This one is episode 260. It's titled 21st Century Poltergeist. Actually, since I don't have much my interest is starting to grow in this area, but since I don't have much familiarity with it, I actually had to look up the definition of poltergeist.
Oh, okay.
So poltergeist is a ghost or supernatural being responsible for physical disturbances. Mm-hmm. And when I read that definition, I wondered if that's an appropriate, like maybe he was using the term slightly differently, because I don't know if that's what was going on in this case. This case is super strange. It sounds like, I mean, it literally just sounds like a movie, but this actually happened. It's crazy. So, okay.
Yeah.
Enough incredulity on my part. Tell us what happened in here.
Okay, so first of all, you're right that the term poltergeist that you read from the dictionary that's not how the term is used in parapsychology. Originally, so for hundreds and hundreds of years, we have records going back to like the AD 500s of this. People have reported strange phenomena around them occasionally. This is fairly rare, but they report it, where objects are moving without explanation. You know, you're in your home, you're with your family, all of a sudden a book flies off the bookshelf and moves across the room. Or you hear unexplained banging sounds, you know, like someone's trying to bang down your door, but there's nobody there. And there are other ways that this phenomena manifests, but it's noisy. And so in German, even though the modern German word for this is a Spuk, they became known, or it was hypothesized at the time, that if you've got this strange noises and strange objects moving without any human cause, that it's a spirit and a ghost. And so the German word Geist just means spirit. It can mean a human spirit. It can also mean a non-human spirit. That's why we talk about the Holy Ghost, because he's a spirit. He's the Holy Spirit. So because these spirits that they assumed were responsible for these phenomena were causing a lot of noise, they became known as Poltergeiste or poltergeists, noisy ghosts, noisy spirits. And the spirit hypothesis is possible. You know, we already talked about how, well, angels and demons have psychokinesis. They can affect matter. Human souls might, if they're the same fundamental thing, they're spirits, maybe they have psychokinesis too. And we parapsychologists would say we've got some evidence that living humans can display psychokinesis sometimes. So the spirit hypothesis explanation of poltergeist phenomena is the most common understanding, and it's the one you'll tend to encounter outside of the parapsychological community, like in the dictionary you read from. But beginning in the 20th century, in parapsychology, a lot of parapsychologists started to look at poltergeist cases and begin to question the spirit interpretation of them, that there was a spirit producing all of these phenomena. Because in a lot of these cases, there was no evidence of a spirit. There was no alternative personality manifesting. There was no communication with a spirit. The spirit was not writing messages on people's mirrors or things like that. There's no evidence of an alternative personality or spirit in these situations. What they noticed instead was that there tended to be one living person in each of these cases, and sometimes more than one, but usually one living person in the majority of these cases who was always present when the phenomenon manifested. If things start moving or things start banging, there's this one person who's there. And this one person, sometimes a young person, but not always, was usually under a lot of stress. And so it was like, could they be throwing these objects or making these banging sounds to work out their frustrations? Well, maybe. And in some cases there were, and these cases were revealed to be hoaxes. You know, they would catch people throwing stuff when no one was looking, or they thought no one was looking. And those would be hoax cases. But there were other cases where it looked like this one person is always here. They're under a lot of stress. They could, and they seem to be somehow responsible for this, but we can show that in this case, this person is not throwing stuff. They're not physically manipulating the objects. We can do controlled conditions where there's no way they could be affecting these things naturally. And so the conclusion was that in many poltergeist cases, what's actually happening is not a spirit, although some may have spirits involved, but it's actually a living person who's under stress, and via their subconscious are venting their frustrations using psychokinesis. And so the proposal for this is known as recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, or RSPK. Psychokinesis is the mind over matter part that would cause the object motion or the banging sounds. It's spontaneous because the person is not trying to do it. They're not trying to do this. It's just happening. So it's a spontaneous event. And it keeps happening, so it's recurrent. And so the leading assumption, especially here in America, when you're investigating a poltergeist case, which I actually personally have, is that what you're dealing with is not a spirit unless you have evidence that a spirit is involved, like some kind of communication with the spirit. Instead, it's a living person who is experiencing recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis due to the stress they're under. And the resolution for the client then is to try to help them learn to manage their stress or redirect what's going on so that it doesn't manifest in this destructive way. And that's basically what happens in the 21st century poltergeist case. This is a case that occurred in North Carolina. Now, you mentioned John Kruth. He's the director of the Rhine Research Foundation, which was created in the 20th century by the famed parapsychologist J.B. Rhine. It used to be part of Duke University, but then when J.B. Rhine retired from Duke University, he created this research center, which still exists. And John Kruth is the executive director of that. He was contacted by a local physician in 2013. So this is 10 years ago. And in 2013, a physician calls him and says, I've got a patient. He's an 11-year-old boy. His family's really concerned because in effect, he's displaying poltergeist phenomena on electronic devices. That's why this is called the 21st century poltergeist, because we have all these electronic devices now. Now, one of the things that people may not be aware of, but that parapsychologists talk about all the time, is that psychokinesis can operate on different scales. If you see a book fly off the bookshelf and zoom across the room, that's a macroscopic object, the book. You can see it with your eyes. And so that's called macro psychokinesis because it's a large visible object that's being affected. But there's also micro psychokinesis, where you might, for example, influence a random number generator on a computer, or you might affect a computer system. And this is, what you'd be doing is, it is mind over matter if this is real. You would be using mind over matter, but what you're affecting is a tiny little system with electrons running around. So this is that you can't see because they're so small. So this is micro psychokinesis. And this has actually been reported in some very famous circles. The famed Nobel Prize winning physicist Wolfgang Pauli was known for having a negative effect on his own equipment and other scientists' equipment. He was so famous for just unexpectedly equipment breaks around him. Other scientists dubbed it the Pauli effect. And it would at least be plausibly interpreted, if psychokinesis exists, as Wolfgang Pauli had low-level psychokinesis that was busting lab equipment. Well, what was happening in this case is you had an 11-year-old boy who was having electronic devices bizarrely malfunction around him constantly. He lived with his mother and his grandmother, and his grandmother made a list of like 31 different things they had observed happening around this boy. And they happened to him at home. They happened to him when he was in school. They happened to him when he was over at friends' houses. So it's like this one boy is at the center of all of this. And I'll give you an example of some of the things that were happening. Their telephone would ring and beep when nobody was touching the phone and nobody was calling. So no one's touching the phone. It just starts ringing and beeping, even though you're not touching it. And if you pick it up and say hello, there's nobody there. The smoke alarm in their house would go off even though there was no smoke. Sheets used for standardized testing in school, if the boy filled them out, he's doing a standardized test in school where you fill in A, B, C, or D, and they'd run his test through the machine wouldn't read it. It'd read everybody else's, but not his. Cell phones around him displayed strange behavior, like the screen on an iPhone suddenly turning completely upside down. And when they took it to the Genius Bar at the Apple Store, they couldn't figure out what had caused it. They'd never seen anything like that. Their television would randomly change channels and the volume would go up and down, even though no one was touching the remote control. Their washing machine, which was operated with a computer touchscreen, lit up all the lights and went through bunches of different cycles and eventually stopped working completely, and they had to replace it. The toaster oven would heat up when the boy was near it, even when it was not turned on or plugged in. And this is one of the things that when John Kruth investigated this case, he saw this.
He saw that himself. That was one of the things that was just mind-blowing to me when you got to that point of the interview, which I highly recommend. Like, go check out the whole interview for yourself if you'd like to hear directly from Kruth all the things that he saw there personally. Like, he went to go investigate, and so he was trying to like debunk stuff. Like, he was going and trying to walk through different scenarios and be like, okay, you go over here, and let's see what happens. And so he was like setting up tests as scientifically as he could to try to see if all this was just sort of made up, or if someone was they just thought that he was causing all of these electrical disturbances when he really wasn't. Like with I think it was the garage door or something like that. Like, he wasn't able to duplicate that when he went, but then as he started to investigate further, like, he found some issues with the phone when the 11-year-old boy would get on the phone. And then the toaster one was just like, it wasn't plugged in, and the boy started to get excited for lunch, and then it turned on just out of nowhere, not plugged in. Crazy.
I'll give some examples of the kind of tests he did, but to relate what happened with the toaster oven. So John is, in addition to running the Rhine Research Center, he also has a background in computers. And so he was, using his knowledge of how computers work to test some things that were going on with the computers in the household. But he realized we've been talking to these people for hours and they haven't eaten. So he said, do you guys need to eat? And the little boy is like, oh yes, please, please, please. We wanted to eat lunch. And so they went into the kitchen, and the mom starts making the little boy a sandwich. And he's so excited for this sandwich. He's literally hopping up and down going, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. And I love that, the innocence of an 11-year-old little boy being that excited about a sandwich. I think that's awesome. But as he's doing that, the toaster oven heats up, and the toaster oven is not even plugged in. And they confirm this. It's not even plugged in, but it's just got hot. And because of how excited the little boy is to eat lunch. And so that's one example of something that happened in front of John. Another was the little boy, unlike any other boys of his age at school, was not allowed to have a cell phone because he couldn't use one. Anytime he got on a cell phone, this squeaking, squawking noise would begin that would make it impossible to hear him. And so John tested this out. He had the little boy place a call to his mother's phone, and his mother answers and lets John hear it. And you get hello from the little boy, and then the horrible squawking sound sets in. And so John goes to the little boy who's, got the phone, and he's yelling into it, hello, hello, hello. But all that's coming out on the other end is this horrible noise. He says, let me see it. And he takes the phone, and the people on the other end can hear John just fine. And he hands it back to the little boy, and the horrible squawking noise starts again. Now, that's pretty weird. But, maybe the little boy had done something to his phone, and this is just purely hypothetical. Maybe he had done something to his phone, like he created an app or something that if he picks it up, it's going to recognize his thumbprint or something and cause a squawking noise, but it's not going to do that for anybody else. That's hypothetical. Now, it's very unlikely that an 11-year-old boy would build an app like that, especially if it's going to get him denied phone privileges that all the other kids his age have. So this is not a plausible hypothesis, but it is a possible hypothesis. So John, who being a scientist and being very careful, wanted to check it out. So he got a different phone. They tested this boy on multiple phones. So his phone, his engineer friend's phone, other people's phones, they give the boy multiple phones. Every time the boy tries to use it, horrible noise.
Doesn't work.
But when anybody else uses it, it's just fine. And they could just hand it back and forth and the noise would start and stop. He also, the little boy had been forbidden to have a computer himself at home because they would break, and he was forbidden to use his grandmother's computer for the same reason. They had already replaced one computer, and the grandmother didn't want him breaking the new one too. So he was not allowed to come into her home office and not allowed to use her printer and her computer. So if he wanted to print something, he would have to send it to her, and he could, from another computer in another room, he could send it over the home network and print. But every time he did that, every piece of paper would feed through the printer blank. And then the grandmother would have to collect all the paper, put it back in, close the drawer, and then it would print whatever the little boy wanted. But this was another thing that John saw himself. The little boy wanted to print something for John. He sent the command to print. Every piece of paper in the printer tray fed through blank. The grandmother had to put them back in, close the drawer, and then it prints what the little boy was trying to print. And this happened over and over again. And so John, having a computer background, thought, okay, what could this be? Could it be a network connection from the little boy's computer? Could there be some kind of embedded command that is doing this? And they checked out all those possibilities, but it's just when John would print from the little boy's computer, it would be fine. But when the little boy printed from his own computer, it would feed every sheet of paper through before it would print what he really wanted. And so this was very frustrated, but it was another thing that they were able to investigate. What are the different possible computer causes of this? Right. And could they eliminate them? Another thing they did, they considered, and actually the little boy was considering this before they even made contact with John, is the boy generating some kind of anomalous electromagnetic field? Mm-hmm. And in fact, when, one of the things that you look for when you're doing I'm actually trained as a parapsychological investigator. And one of the things you do when you're starting an investigation or considering starting one is you look for evidence of, could this be a hoax? Could these people be just seeking publicity? Like they want to sell the movie rights, or they want to write a book, or they want attention or something. They want publicity. And so, being a good investigator, that was one of the things John considered. And he wanted to interview the family and asked what their goals are. And this is actually something that good parapsychological investigators do. It unlike ghost hunting shows, which are rubbish, you're not just going out and trying to have exciting experiences. What you're trying to do is help a client. And so if a client is having problems of some kind and wants a paranormal investigator to help, you need to find out, what is the client's goal? Do they want the phenomena to stop? Do they just want to understand what it is? Some people, they may feel, their dead loved one is visiting them and they don't want that to stop. They just want a kind of a sanity check of, could this really be my loved one that's trying to let me know they're okay in the afterlife? Which would make it an apparition, which the Catholic faith is totally open to. But in other cases, they want it to stop. They don't care about publicity. They just want this to end. And so John asked the family, what would you like to see come out of this case? And they wanted it to stop. They were not interested in publicity. In fact, it's 10 years later, they'd never made their names known. And for privacy reasons, you protect your client. John has not revealed their names. But the little boy in particular had a personal reason for wanting John to become involved in the case. He said, "I'm afraid my electromagnetic field may hurt my grandmother." And so that's how you, even already before they contacted John, they're thinking in terms of, could this boy have an anomalous electromagnetic field that is causing all these device malfunctions?
Mm-hmm.
And we've only actually named a few of them. There were a lot more. One thing you did mention, the garage door, that was malfunctioning intermittently. But in that case, John found, no, it's just broken.
Yeah.
It's got a faulty connection. And this is one of the things that good not ghost hunters, but good parapsychological investigators look for, is they look at every individual thing that's being reported and try to find natural explanations for it. And frequently they will find that some of what's happening in a location is entirely natural. But people, once they get the idea something strange is going on here, then they naturally think everything that's strange is due to what they suspect. So like in this case, the little boy, they know strange stuff is happening with him around electronic devices. So the garage door is an electronic device. Strange stuff is happening with it. It must be the little boy. But not in this case. John was able to show, no, this is a separate thing. You just need to get this fixed. But when it comes to the hypothesis, the little boy's got an anomalous electromagnetic field, it would be hard to see how he would have one strong enough to do all this. But they checked. There are meters, that will read electromagnetic fields, and they would use them around the boy to try to detect, does he have anything unusual happening with him electromagnetically? Like when he's talking on the phone and it's making the horrible squawking noise, is he emitting an electromagnetic field that's causing the phone to do that? Well, they're checking him with a meter, and the answer is no, he's not. He doesn't have a detectable electromagnetic field that could be responsible for all of these things. The electromagnetic readings are normal around the boy. So it looks like this is not electromagnetism. This is something genuinely paranormal. Specifically, it looks like micro psychokinesis. And so, well, one of the things that happens in poltergeist cases that are caused or thought to be caused by a living human is the poltergeist agent, the person who's responsible for the phenomena, is typically under a lot of stress. And this little boy is under a lot of stress because stuff is not working for him at home and school and friend's house, and he's getting yelled at. And every time
his parents
something
are just,
happens,
his grandmother was just frustrated. She's frustrated about all the stuff that's happening because she can't use like everyday things. Like I think they went through like 3 or 4 different washing machines because they would continually break around him.
Yeah. And so what John does, because he's client focused, which is what good investigators are, what you see on ghost hunter shows where they're going through dark houses, number one, real parapsychological investigators don't investigate in the dark. That's stage theatrics. But running around in the dark, waving gear and yelling at ghosts and demons, that is not what real parapsychological investigators do. They're focused on their clients and how can they help the client. And they do want to investigate and see if anything is paranormal is happening here, or if it all has natural causes. But they're focused on the client. So the client wants the phenomena to stop. So what do you do when you got a person who's overly stressed? You help them relax. And so John taught the little boy and the family in general, but specifically the little boy, relaxation exercises. How to do controlled breathing in a way to relax yourself. He also talked privately to the mother and grandmother and said, when we don't want to elevate the little boy's stress level. So when something strange happens, just act normal. Don't make a big deal out of it. Don't yell at him. Don't make him feel bad or under stress. Just move on if something weird is happening, and that'll help decrease his stress level and help the phenomena subside. And both the mother and the grandmother, I love this part of the story. Both the mother and the grandmother are like, okay, yeah, got it. Act normal. Don't stress the little boy. Then the fire alarm goes off, and they're like, hey, son, stop messing with the fire alarm psychokinetically. It's like, what did we just say? If something weird happens, don't make a big deal out of it. Just don't blame the little boy. Just move on. So there was a bit of a learning curve on that one, but they did that. And the little boy really took to the relaxation exercises. And within a couple of weeks, the phenomena subsided until the little boy's father re-entered the picture. The little boy's father had been alienated from the family, and he came back to town. And the mother and grandmother were afraid that he was going to initiate contact with the family and that it would be negative for the family. So they actually left their home and went to a motel. And they're staying in this motel to avoid the father. And of course, that's stressful in itself. So now the little boy is afraid his father is going to try to get them. And as they're staying in the hotel, all kinds of banging starts happening. It sounds like someone's banging on the walls and trying to break down their door, and the lights are flickering, and all kinds of stuff's going on. And they complain to the motel manager, and the motel manager says, "There's nobody else on your floor. You're the only people up there. There's no one on the other side of your wall." And so they try the relaxation exercises, and the situation with the father resolves, and the phenomena subside again. So this looks like a plausible case of recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis on the part of a little boy who's experiencing frustrations and is acting out subconsciously using micro psychokinesis to affect electronic devices around him. Now, that's not proof that that's what this is. You can have other interpretations of it, but it's plausibly read that way if, like St. Thomas Aquinas, you're open to the possibility of psychokinesis, because St. Thomas Aquinas actually believed in a form of what we today would call psychokinesis. Specifically, he believed in what today would be called distant mental influence on living systems, also known as DMILS, distant mental influence on living systems, where you use mind over matter, this is the claim, to influence a living system, like help a plant grow or help it die. And St. Thomas Aquinas believed that this was the explanation for the evil eye, that if someone is vehemently hating or vehemently envious of another person, it can influence them at a distance as a form of what today would be considered a psychic attack. And they can be vulnerable to it, especially if they're in frail health or a small child. And so he believed in a form of psychokinesis that could affect other things, including other people. And so if you're open to this as an idea, then the 21st century poltergeist case is plausibly read as a case of RSPK, or recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, since we don't have any evidence of a spirit manifesting.
So let's pull up some comments. One of them is from Word. Pretty funny comment. Was the little boy named Tom Cruise? I mentioned at the beginning of this.
Pretty sure
mentioned at the beginning of this. Yeah, I mentioned at the beginning of this. This sound like, it literally sounds like a movie, right? Mm-hmm. This is like the story plot of a movie. Is this little boy who has these seemingly superpowers that he can't control? It's almost like X-Men. Okay, so another comment from Brian Stevens. The story is...
I would say what this doesn't have that a movie does is a bang-up ending. Because let's learn some breathing exercises to relax. That's not the most Hollywood ending to a story. There's no big explosion at the end. It's not like the movie Carrie, which was based on a book by Stephen King, which actually had been influenced by his research into poltergeist cases.
So then Brian Stevens says the story is so detailed and yet none of it is recorded. So he's been looking up the story as we've been talking, apparently.
Well, it is recorded. It's published in a peer-reviewed academic journal. It's in the Journal of Parapsychology.
Maybe he means by recorded, he means like video.
And so I don't know that that's the case. What I do know is there's client protection. And you can't, it's like when you read a medical case in a medical journal, they're not going to tell you the name of the patient that had this bizarre medical condition. They're going to hide that. They'll give you data that's been peer reviewed, but they're not going to say, and here's a photograph of our anonymous patient, because that reveals the patient's identity. So as far as I know, they did do videotape and audio recordings of their investigation. That is common in parapsychological investigations. One of the things you always do is bring along your recording equipment so you can try to capture stuff, especially in poltergeist cases, because there's the potential of capturing visual phenomena on camera. The question, though, is can you then release that data? And if the clients want privacy, you can't release the data because that violates client confidentiality. And this family has not wanted their identities known. They've kept them. They've kept this off the record for 10 years. John is allowed to publish an anonymized account of what happened, but he can't, which has been peer reviewed, but he can't just dump all of the data that would be revealing of their identities. That would be unethical.
Yeah. And this is Brian's other question. Is what you just said is sort of answered. He says, "Where is this boy today? Can we test him?" So yeah, it just kind of goes back to.
I presume he's in North Carolina. I believe John has had some recent contact with the family. He would be in his early 20s now, and I gather he has developed normally. In terms of testing poltergeist experience, that's actually been done. In addition to learning relaxation exercises, one of the things that has been reported to help poltergeist experiencers is learning how to redirect their psychokinesis. So you can give them a psychokinetic task, like you make a little device. It's called a psi wheel, but basically you got like a spindle with a little folded wheel-like device. Can be made out of paper or aluminum foil. You put that on it. You put it in a sealed container so air currents can't get to it. And you say, okay, we've got this sealed container with a little wheel on a pin. Make the wheel spin, without physically touching it, and you can't blow on it. And so there's no physical way to do it. Do it with your mind. And sometimes, and there are other devices that get used too. There's one called an Edgeley wheel that gets used sometimes. And there have been cases where a person who is experiencing poltergeist phenomena has tried to concentrate their psychokinesis on a task like this. And that can cause the phenomena to diminish. Sometimes people do learn to control this. And so there are cases where you can bring them into the lab and they can demonstrate psychokinesis in front of you, and you can videotape it. And it can be done under controlled conditions. But that's not everybody. Sometimes, because these abilities are not well controlled by humans, sometimes they appear, this is at least the appearance of things, they appear to be able to manifest psychokinesis spontaneously, but they can't do it with conscious control. So sometimes testing under controlled situations works with these people. Sometimes it doesn't. It depends on them.
So if you don't mind, I'd like to switch gears and actually kind of do something that you do on your podcast, which is look at things from the twin perspectives of reason and faith. Mm-hmm. So let's address this from the reason perspective. What can we say about the phenomena, this case with this 11-year-old boy? What are some possible explanations for what happened here?
If you are, so in terms of possible explanations, well, this could all be a hoax. The little boy, possibly with the collusion of his mother and grandmother, could have hoaxed all this somehow.
Well, couldn't also John Kruth be lying about everything?
John Kruth could be lying about everything. So the hoax could start there. It could start with the family. It would have to involve more than John Kruth, though, because he had an engineer with him as a co-investigator. So it would have to be both of them. It could be that there is a rare natural phenomenon that is intermittent, like an electromagnetic field around the boy that turns on and off. Or it could be something you always got to think about misperception and so forth. But this phenomenon is pretty overt. It's not like you're looking at a smudge in the distance. It's like every piece of paper is going through the printer blank. The phone is making an audibly weird noise every time the boy picks it up. So this is pretty overt phenomena. It's hard to say there's nothing going on here. It also,
to me, it's weird that it's like each different thing that happens with him is intelligible. It's not as if things just turn on and off, right? It's not as if he walks by and there's some sort of like electromagnetic pulse that shuts things off or something like that. It's like weird things happen. Like the printer starts printing out or like spitting out all these blank pages, or like there's a static that happens on the phone, or the phone that he has, the screen turns upside down. It's not as if things just sort of turn on and off. It's more like there's just weird electrical things that, and it's sort of different and intelligible in each case. That to me is like more puzzling than if things just like turned off when he used it,
Yeah. And these are database things. Like if your phone screen turns upside down, that's because the data on the phone has changed. Because the data is programmed to show you your phone screen right side up. So if it starts displaying upside down, that's not turning on and off. That's a shift in the data that's on the phone in the operating system. But still trying to map out our conceptual space. We've got hoax at one end, misperception, and unknown natural electromagnetic phenomenon. And then we start getting into the paranormal explanations, the most plausible of which is psychokinesis. You also could propose there's a spirit involved. We don't have any evidence of that, but you could propose it as a possible explanation, since spirits can influence matter. So that's sort of a sketch of the conceptual space of explanations. But when we look at the individuals, so do we have evidence of hoax? Well, we don't have any positive evidence of hoax. Also, we have evidence against hoax. John Kruth, who I know personally, he's an extremely ethical man, and he's not a fool. So he's making his living in parapsychology. You know what happens to people who hoax things, who are parapsychological researchers? They lose their jobs. He reports to a board. The board would fire him instantly if he was credibly accused of fraud. So
he has a lot at stake.
Yeah, his career, his reputation, his finances. He's not going to risk that for hoaxing something like that. And there have been cases in the history of parapsychology. It's rare. It's actually more rare in parapsychology than in other branches of science to have fraud, because the parapsychologists know they're viewed with hostility by many other people. So their critics will seize on anything they can to bash parapsychologists. So they have to mind their P's and Q's in a way other scientists don't. And actually, parapsychologists are among the most careful scientists in terms of things like experimental design. They have actually pioneered techniques that were later adopted in other fields of science, like not just double blinding but an experiment, but multi-blinding it, where nobody involved in the experience in the experiment knows the full picture. Nobody has all of the data, so nobody could be the leak through which the data gets out. So multi-blinding is something I know of some parapsychological experiments that are done with 5 levels of blinding, which is way beyond the 2 levels of blinding that most medical studies have. So they're extremely careful. There have been a few rare cases where someone working in parapsychology was caught doing fraud, and it ended their career. So I don't think not only do we not have positive evidence of fraud on John and his colleagues' case, we have considerable motivation, which would count as evidence against the possibility of fraud in this case. Similarly, the family, if they were committing fraud, why? They weren't seeking publicity. It's 10 years later and they still haven't announced who they were. So they weren't seeking a movie deal or a book deal or 10 minutes with Oprah or anything like that. So it doesn't appear that they have a plausible motive for fraud either. And they had an engineer and a computer guy come in and investigate this stuff. How did they fake it all? How did they make the phone emit horrible noises whenever the boy held it, but not when it was passed to anybody else? And do so without him emitting a measurable electromagnetic field. It doesn't seem like that would be within the capability of a normal
Right.
North Carolina grandmother and single mom. So it doesn't look obvious how they could hoax this case. So the hoax hypothesis, either on John's part or the family's part, is not looking good. What about misperception? Well, okay, if you're viewing things under bad conditions, like in the dark or at a great distance, you can misunderstand what it is you're looking at.
Or one time, if you just do a test once.
One time. Yeah. But none of that applies here. We have big, visible, macroscopic phenomena happening in front of people repeatedly in full daylight.
Right.
The phone is doing this. The printer is doing this. This is all verified, and there are others as well. This is all verifiable in an easy, obvious way. So misperception, even though it can explain some things, like, some Bigfoot sightings are really bears, that people see a bear at a distance and it's standing on its legs because bears do that, and they think it's a Bigfoot. Okay, that I can buy misperception in those cases, but this is not a case of misperception. So then that would lead us to rare, unexplained electrical phenomena. Okay, maybe, but here, if it's genuinely unknown, you're appealing to one unknown to explain away another unknown. How do you know your mysterious, intermittent, undetectable electromagnetic phenomenon isn't just psychokinesis? I mean, maybe they're the same thing. Maybe this is just a type of psychokinesis. You can call it something else and say, oh, it's an unknown natural phenomenon. Well, okay, fine. Duh. That's what psychokinesis is supposed to be, an unknown natural phenomenon. So I don't think...
an unknown X is not an explanation. It can't operate as an explanation. You have to have some sort of content in order to generate some sort of expectation that you're going to predict this data to occur. So if the hypothesis is something that you just don't know, then you're not going to have any sort of expectation of what would occur if that thing were true, if that hypothesis were true. So if you're trying to do some sort of like confirmation using Bayesianism or any kind of like probabilistic inference, you're not going to be able to do that. You have to know what the probability is of that data given the hypothesis. But if the hypothesis is like just the content is not even there, then you're not generating an expectations either way. You're not going to find confirming data. You're not going to find disconfirming data. Mm-hmm. So it's not not an explanation at all. It's not a good candidate. I personally don't even think we should take it seriously.
No, it's basically a kind of last-ditch natural explanation when you can't think of something else. It's some unknown natural thing.
Right.
But that's materially indistinguishable from the psychokinesis hypothesis. By the way, since I know you're a fan of Bayesian statistics, they get used a lot in parapsychology. Parapsychology, They have lots of discussions of statistics, including Bayesian statistics. But that's a story for another day. So then let's jump to the other end of the spectrum and say, okay, it was a spirit. It was a literal noisy ghost when it's making, bad noises come out of the phone. Okay, fine. Mm-hmm. What evidence do we have that it's a spirit? I mean, why is it following this little boy if it's not him?
And then it's doing these very specific things. Like it's not as if when you pick up the phone, it's like whispering or doing something like, or like maybe it would be writing something on the pieces of paper as they come out. Like it's not doing any of that. It's doing very like flipping the phone upside down. Maybe you could say that they're just trying to cause confusion. Like that would be their motivation. So
you could propose those things, but there's no effort at communication happening here. No discernible effort at communication. I mean, if it's a non-human intelligence, it could think completely differently than we do. Maybe it's trying to communicate, but we can't detect it. There's no voice phenomena, there's no writing phenomena, there's no intuition of I feel the spirit is telling me this. None of that is happening. So it doesn't appear that there's a spirit involved. There's just no evidence for that. You can propose it, but you can propose that in any situation, and we don't have positive evidence for it. So if we set it aside on lack of evidence, what does the evidence best seem to fit? The evidence best seems to fit if you're open to the possibility of psychokinesis. Now, if you're not, then this isn't going to work for you. But if you're open to the possibility of psychokinesis, then the evidence best seems to fit. This little boy is recurrently, spontaneously manifesting psychokinesis, and it's due to stress. So when he learns how to manage his stress, the phenomena goes away. When he gets new stress, like his evil father comes back into town, the phenomena happens again. And when the father goes away, and the stress goes down, the phenomena go away again.
So a question that I've got on this hypothesis,
by the way,
is
I don't know that his father's actually evil. I just said that for purposes of illustration. His father may be a good guy. I just don't know.
Yeah, no problem. So the question I've got is, what would be sort of required to believe? What would be some of the constituents of this hypothesis of psychokinesis? So would it be, would you have to believe, for example, in dualism? The view that we are not just physical beings, but also, really the substance that we are is a sort of immaterial soul, and then we have a body. So that we've got these two substances that make up a human person. But would you have to believe that? Would you have to believe in the existence of God in order to believe in psychokinesis? Like, what would be the requirements in order to forward that hypothesis?
You don't have to believe in either one of those. In fact, I know a parapsychologist who he would like substance dualism to be true because he'd like to survive death, but he's philosophically a materialist, and he's open to psychokinetic phenomena, including poltergeist phenomena, but he's coming at it from a materialist perspective. So there will be other people who will say things like, and I would put myself in this camp, who would say things like, the fact we don't have a physical explanation for these phenomena is consistent with the idea that they work through non-physical means. And so I would think the existence of psychic phenomena actually can offer evidence in favor of substance dualism, but you don't have to be a substance dualist in order to believe in it, because there are non-substance dualists. There are materialists who believe in psychic phenomena without believing in substance dualism. But there are also people who argue that it gives us evidence for substance dualism.
And a hypothesis that was sort of rolling around in my mind. In philosophy of mind, there's this question of like, why do souls get combined with physical bodies? And there was even a question that a friend of mine put forward, like, could God put my soul in my desk? It's an interesting philosophical question, actually. Like, why do souls go into bodies? Like, why is that the case if you're a substance dualist? So, but the reason why I even bring up that question is because, well, let's suppose that dualism is true, that we are not just physical bodies, but we are souls, and then we have physical bodies. So we're these two types of substances. So suppose that's true. I think that there's got to be some sort of boundary around where the soul and the body combine together, right? This soul is not going to be located sort of everywhere. It's going to be located somewhere, and it's going to be some specific space. But what could be happening? This is just my initial thought, is that the boundaries, and maybe this is the completely wrong way to think about it, probably is, but maybe the boundaries of the soul and the body and the way that they interact, maybe the boundaries with respect to this young man, this 11-year-old boy, the boundaries started to get fuzzy, and they started to spill over. And so the soul in some way because he was getting stressed and everything, and that's what was the sort of trigger to cause things. There was some sort of the boundary was fuzzy, and so things started to spill over and have an effect on other physical things instead of just on his physical body.
So there are elements of that actually get discussed in parapsychology. You will find now. For example, you will find, I know parapsychologists personally who will say things like, okay, if psychokinesis is mind over matter, well, I've got a mind and my body is matter. So lifting my arm is a form of psychokinesis, and my central nervous system is the interface that makes that happen. And so there's then a separate question of how is there a spirit and how does it get involved? And one of the common theories that you hear a good bit in parapsychology is that the brain, it does not actually generate our thoughts. Instead, our brain is not a generator, it's a transducer. What a transducer is a device that converts one thing into another. So like your television back in the old days before cable, there would be radio waves of television signals coming through the air. You'd have an antenna that would gather those television signals, and then your TV would process them or transduce them, convert them into a visible and audio signal that you can watch on your screen and see I Love Lucy or whatever it was. And so radios work the same way, microphones work the same way. Our eyes are transducers for visual signals into electrochemical signals that our brain can process. Our ears are audio transducers. We've already got transducers in our bodies, and they need to function right for the right things to happen. If your TV is broken, it's not going to process television signals right. It may, or if the speaker in your TV is broken, it's not going to transduce audio signals right. It's going to sound scratchy and horrible. So the proposal is our brain is a transducer for our soul or spirit or consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And this is why people in ordinary life, our consciousness or soul or spirit is focused on working through our brain, which transduces our, let's say, free will choices into physical manifestations. And if our brain is not working right, let's say we're high on some drug or you had a railroad spike driven through your head, it's just like if you drive a spike through the speaker in your radio or television, it's not going to sound right. You're not going to think right if you gum up the transducer mechanism that is converting your soul's intentions. So this is one of the possibilities. And it would explain why people seem to be able to have conscious experiences without their bodies. There are various, they're called out-of-body experiences. They commonly are reported in near-death experiences. Where
Let's actually, before you talk too much detail about that, let me ask the audience, if you'd like to have or see Jimmy back to talk about some of these cases that you were just explaining, let me know. Let me know if you'd like to hear about out-of-body experiences, or what was the term that you sent me in the text? Is like remote spies or psychic spies?
Remote viewing. Yes, it's a discipline.
Remote viewing, psychic spies.
That the Defense Department had a psychic spying program during the Cold War to spy on the Russians and Chinese and Muslim terrorists and drug smugglers, and it was called the Stargate program. They had the name before the movie and the TV show Stargate. And it's all been declassified now. And I know I've interviewed several people who were part of the program. I didn't dream years ago that I would one day have, the phone numbers of former psychic spies on my cell phone, but I do. And so, I'd be happy to come on, talk about that, or talk about near-death experiences, which have a lot of interest. Well, specifically near-death ones, because these are cases where frequently the person's heart has stopped. They've suffered cardiac arrest, and still the person has these experiences that are highly suggestive of survival beyond death. including veridical information that the person did not know at the time of their cardiac arrest, but they come back with extra information that can be verified. And so there's a lot of interest there. In fact, I'm going to be using that in an apologetics book I'm about to write, talking about those experiences. So there's a lot of crossover on those things. But
So
I was going to say,
go ahead and finish your point.
Just real briefly, if the brain is a transducer rather than a generator of thought, that would explain why when someone's heart stops, they're able to continue to have experiences that include accurate information they didn't previously know. It's because your consciousness is not dependent on your body. Your body, and specifically your central nervous system in your brain, is a transducer for your consciousness, but it's not what causes your consciousness.
So here's another possible explanation, and this one would probably need a whole lot more meat on it in order to sort of flesh it out. But this is if I can just kind of get like the basic idea out that I have in my mind right now, which is I basically got to use an analogy. So I think in the earliest Tesla vehicles, they had hardware in the cars that were not functional yet. And eventually, and this could be wrong, but it's supposed to be an analogy, so this could be false, but that doesn't matter. So suppose that there were this other company that released a car that had all of these functions that people didn't know about, but they were eventually going to roll these out through like software updates and firmware updates, okay? So that eventually all of the capability of the car would be fully functional, say in like 10 years' time after the first person bought it, through different firmware updates or upgrades.
They kind of did that with iPhones.
Not everything was functional yet.
Correct. They didn't have copy and paste on the original iPhone, for example, but they were planning to build that into the OS.
So so something like that. So that's the sort of analogy that I've got here with respect to. So like maybe this is a capability. Suppose that Christianity is true and that theosis is a thing that's going to happen at the eschaton, and so we're going to have this sort of transformation. We're going to be reunited with our physical bodies, and there's going to be different laws of nature, and things are going to be just a lot different. So. But suppose it's not as if our souls are being changed or anything. It's not as if like who we are is going to change. Rather, the physical substrate that we possess, that may not be the right word to use, but like that's the physical body that is accompanied with our soul, is going to be sort of fully functional at that point. And so what may have happened in this case is that some of his other abilities, again, kind of like this seeping through idea, started to like he had some of the functionality that's there, but in the current state that we're in, we're limited. Some of that has started to seep through a little bit. So that's the hypothesis. I don't know if it has any merit or anything. Feel free to just completely debunk it. But
oh no, I'll actually build on it, because now you're speaking from within a specifically Christian frame of reference,
right,
which is different than a scientific parapsychological pure science approach. But from within a Christian frame of reference, we can ask about, if God built these abilities into our nature, why did he do so, and why do they function the way they do? Maybe at the resurrection, when we have our new bodies and are completely perfected, we'll be able to use psychic functioning reliably. We're told we're going to be like Jesus. Jesus did things that are, he performed effects that parapsychologists actually have a name for. When Jesus gets out of the tomb before the rock is rolled away, or when the disciples have the doors locked because they're afraid and suddenly Jesus physically appears there. In parapsychology, there's a name for that. That is known as apportation. An apportation occurs when an object physically appears somewhere with no natural physical route it could have gotten there by. So maybe if we're going to be like Jesus, we're all going to be able to perform apportation in the resurrection. But there's also a question of what about the other end of human history? Because there are various theologians like Aquinas who would say that Adam and Eve had what are referred to as preternatural gifts, which are basically superpowers. They're things human nature can't do today. But there have been Catholic parapsychologists, like the early 20th century parapsychologist Father Alois Feisinger, who proposed that what psychic functions are the remnants of the preternatural gifts that we had in the beginning. So our first parents, before the fall, on this hypothesis, would have had reliable psychic functioning, but then they damaged human nature through the fall of man. And as a result, the psychic functions that we have are weaker and unreliable, and will then get perfect restored functioning back at the resurrection. So that's one possible scenario that is plausible from a Christian point of view.
Okay, I think that's actually going to do it for us today. We've already been talking for about 2 hours, and we've got through everything that we wanted to get through. But Jimmy, is there anything that you'd like to leave with the audience before we close out today's episode? Anything that we didn't get into that you wanted to?
Not in particular, but I guess I'd mentioned, thank you very much for having me on. I hope folks will check out Mysterious World. There is a video version of the podcast right here on YouTube. You can go to my YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/Jimmy Akin. So just youtube.com/Jimmy Akin. We have a new episode every Friday, sometimes more than every Friday. I try to keep it really interesting. There's a diversity of topics. We look at everything from the faith and reason perspectives. There's a lot more to know about all of these, and you can check out the episodes on them, but there are a lot of other mysteries too. And I try to open-mindedly, but using critical thinking, explore these things. And I hope you'll join us. So far, we have about 100,000 listeners per episode, including our audio listeners. You can find the show on any podcast platform. It's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Spotify, it's on Stitcher, it's on all those things. And it happens to be a top 20 documentary podcast in the US on Apple Podcasts. So of all the different documentary podcasts they have on Apple Podcasts, we're in the top 20 consistently. And we often peak around number 6, 7, or 8 right after we release, even though we're competing against documentary podcast makers like NPR and various public radio stations that have way more money than we do.
Yeah, that's impressive.
Yeah, so check us out.
Yeah, and then also feel free to go ahead and plug your Patreon as well for people that'd like to support the work that you do over there at Mysterious World.
Thank you. So we're part of a larger podcast network called StarQuest, and if you're interested in supporting Mysterious World or any of the other StarQuest shows, go to sqpn.com/give, or on Patreon, just search for SQPN or StarQuest.
Excellent. Yeah, please go support him. Please support the work that he's doing. This is really, really good stuff. I want you to go check out his podcast. I've got it linked in the description of this video. Again, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. He did not pay me to say this. I just wanted to support him and then just talk about some really interesting stuff today. So hopefully you got something out of it. Hopefully it's starting to get some gears turning up there. And let me know what you think as usual in the comments. Let me know if you'd like to have, or if you'd like me to have, Jimmy back on to talk about some other topic, or maybe some of these. What I've been actually doing is I'm trying to keep a close eye on the whole David Grush situation and anything that's sort of related to that. So you might be seeing Jimmy back on sometime soon to talk about some of those updates. But we'll see how things develop. We'll see how the content of Capturing Christianity develops. This is not going to be a sort of main thing every week that we discuss, but it is going to be a topic every now and then that's has some overlap again with apologetics, and will find its way into our content every now and then. So thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next episode, as usual, very soon. So see you guys soon. Hey, it's me again. Actually, don't leave yet. I've got something super, super important to tell you. So first of all, you're awesome. Like you just watched a really, really long video just now, and you're still watching it. That is actually pretty amazing. Secondly, we have hundreds, literally hundreds of other apologetics related videos for you to watch on our channel. Go check them out. I've interviewed exorcists, hosted debates between Christians and atheists. I've even made response videos to atheists. All of that is available on our channel. Go check it out.
third, I rely on people that see value in my work, people like you that watch videos to the very end, to keep the lights on around here. Literally, this is how I feed my family. So if you see value in the work that I do, please consider supporting this ministry and becoming a patron. Links to that are in the description. Oh, and have I mentioned that Christianity is true?